Senator Ron Johnson, one of the most hyperbolic and reactionary Republicans in the Senate, and that's not easy thing to say about Republicans in the Senate because all of them are extremely reactionary and hyperbolic, but he had some pretty interesting remarks to say about President Joe Biden. Check this out.
Why is he granting these waivers to countries that are not particularly friendly? They're hostile towards us. And meanwhile, taking away American jobs simultaneously.
Because he's weak. And don't ask me to get inside the mind of a liberal, progressive, socialist, Marxist like President Biden. But what I do know is this is a self-inflicted wound that he is perpetrating on this nation. China, India, they are going to continue to use fossil fuels. What we do to ourselves, the trillions of dollars in economic harm to America and Americans, the rising oil and gas prices, is going to have no impact whatsoever on the climate. And the other thing is they're not factoring in the economic harm done by green energy. What about battery production? What about rare earth mineral mining? So again, the progressives, liberals, Marxists, socialists, they live in a fantasy world, but unfortunately it's a fantasy world that when imposed on America will lead us down a path of destruction.
Okay, so he kind of just said a mouthful there, but I'll try to tackle as much of it as I can. Now, I want to preface my comments by saying that I only saw this clip. I just picked up the clip. I saw the clip. I thought it was interesting and I want to talk about it. I don't really know what context they're speaking about here in regards to these waivers. The only thing that really comes to my mind, and I might be incorrect about this, if I am, please do correct me. I guess they're talking about Biden backing waivers for other countries to manufacture the vaccine, I think. And if they're against that, then they're pretty much like pro-genocide, because that's kind of what that is. You don't want other countries to be able to manufacture a life-saving vaccine that would save the lives of people that would otherwise quite literally die from getting, the COVID-19 virus. But I digress from that. And they say that they shouldn't get the waivers because those specific countries, may or may not be hostile towards us. What? Well, hostile towards the United States of America, as if the United States isn't hostile towards other countries. We're literally waging economic warfare against Iran. We were sanctioning medicine going into Iran. And the international courts told us that violated international law and that we couldn't do that. And we told them to fuck off. And that's only one example. So being hostile towards other countries, it takes a lot of balls to say that. And also, what do you want to do? Do you want to go to war with those countries or something? I'm sure that's something that Sean Hannity and Mr. Ron Johnson here would advocate for. But anyway, this is my favorite part about it. He says that Joe Biden, and I had to write this down because it was a mouthful and I couldn't remember it all. He says that he doesn't know what goes on in the mind of a liberal, progressive, socialist, Marxist. 4 different words that have 4 different meanings. And he just labeled Joe Biden as every single one of them. And every single one of them doesn't describe what Joe Biden is. In fact, he's so far from every single one of those words, it doesn't really make much sense. I mean, I guess you could argue he's a liberal, but the other 3, no, not whatsoever. I mean, does he have progressive tendencies on social issues? Maybe. Yeah, you could possibly give him that. But on the economics, not at all. No, I would argue no, just flat out no there. But this is the thing. These Republicans, they live in, and he says that progressives live in a fantasy world, and we'll get to that in a second. But in fact, it's him and all of his idiot Republican buddies that live in the fantasy world. First of all, not a single politician that I know of identifies as a Marxist. I can count on one hand how many that are elected in Congress that flat out identifies as a socialist, if there are any. I mean, like just a flat out socialist. They'll either say, I'm a social democrat or a democratic socialist. And even those are far few and in between. Not that many are actually progressives out of elected Congress people. I mean, what, you got the Justice Democrats, and really who else? You got Bernie Sanders. Who else? Elizabeth Warren. That's it. Okay. So he's just labeling people and none of it applies. But there's a reason why he does this. The Republican base is so rabid and they don't actually listen to what people have to say. Oh, a majority of them. Let me not clump them all in together. But a majority of them, they don't really care about the facts or what policies will actually benefit them in their lives. They just listen for scare words like liberal, like progressive, like socialist, and like Marxist. And he just ticked the box for every single one of them, and that's all they need to hear. And they go, oh yeah, she's fucking Marxist, socialist, liberal, progressive, all that shit. So that's just what they do. I'm surprised he didn't call him a communist. That's the only one he missed. I mean, he gave him every other name in the book. Might as well chuck communist in there. Seems like you forgot about that one. But that's their line of attack. They want to brand Joe Biden. Fucking Joe Biden. And Joe Biden at the moment is conceding everything to them. I mean, look at what he's gotten done so far. That's the point. Nothing. Nothing really. I mean, the people got $1,400 checks. Since then, they haven't really seen anything else. I mean, the infrastructure package has been so watered down. And you see what he gets in return for watering down the infrastructure package, for not passing the $15 minimum wage because of a advisory rule by the parliamentarian. Do you see what he gets? He gets labeled something that he would otherwise detest. A Marxist, socialist, progressive, liberal. So trying to please the Republicans do nothing for you if you're a Democrat unless you're passing the exact laws that they want. Otherwise, they're always going to oppose you. Now, enough about the name calling. Let me speak on the so-called fantasy world that he claims that progressives live in. So it's this thing on the right. They like to pretend like all the other countries in the world are like the same as the United States, and that thriving social democracies don't exist. What about the Western European countries that have a pretty good tax system? They have universal health care, free college, a living wage for their people, unions, all the rest. What about those countries? Those are fantasy worlds? No. Those countries actually exist. Countries with universal health care actually exist. We're actually the only industrialized country without it. So I'm confused about this fantasy world that the socialists, the Marxists, and the progressives live in. Because other countries seem to have attained the things that they're actually asking for, such as a living wage, healthcare for all, free college, etc. I'm really confused about this. They try to make it seem like the things that progressives ask for are impossible when they've been achieved in other countries that apparently aren't as great as the United States, because this is the greatest country in the world, right? So why can't we do something like universal health care? They don't have an answer for that question. And last but not least, and this is the funniest thing of all, I guess, he's a flat out climate change denier. Flat out climate change denier. He says that, if we were to impose on America, I guess the kinds of progressive legislation that I guess socialists would want, it would lead them down to a path of destruction. Did it lead the Scandinavian countries to a path of destruction? What about Germany? What about, the UK has a nationalized healthcare service in their capitalist system that isn't going anywhere because the people like their healthcare there. I'm sorry to get back on that, but I had to. But back to the climate change stuff. He says that China and India are still using fossil fuels, so that gives us an excuse to do it. I thought we were trying to save the planet here, but oh, that's right. He doesn't give a fuck about that. He says that green energy is actually the bad thing, when that's actually the solution to move on from fossil fuels, because that stuff doesn't last forever. But you can't tell this guy that because he lives in an entirely different universe. He's the one that's actually in the fantasy world. The stuff that he said here was absolutely atrocious, and it actually saddens me deeply that people will watch that and believe some of it, if not all of it. But once again, another reactionary, hyperbolic, insane Republican. I still wonder how these people get elected. I guess at this point, I should kind of give it up, especially when somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene has made her way to an elected office. At this, I mean, Donald Trump was the president, for God's sake. At this point, anybody can get elected. But wow. Apparently, Joe Biden is a liberal, progressive, socialist, Marxist.